Yes, you now know the four elements of chess and the basic tactics. You have done well. We are almost ready to learn an opening system. There are just a few more rules that we should go over first. Rule number 1. Do not move a piece twice in the opening. If you do, then you will get behind in development or time, which is one of the elements of chess. Rule number 2. Do not move the queen out early, as it becomes a target and can be easily lost. You will also lose valuable time protecting it. Rule number 3. Develop your bishops and your knights first. Then you can develop your rooks and your queen. Rule number 4. Castle early on to protect your king from attack. And finally, the last rule is rule number 5, and you need to use your knowledge of chess to develop a plan of action. Now you are ready to learn an opening system. With your newfound knowledge, I will teach you the Giuoco Piano opening system. As I go through this opening, I will explain the ideas behind the moves for both sides. That way, you could play this opening as either white or black. And it is an opening where you reach an equal position, so playing it as white or black is good. Alright, here we see e4, e5, and the purpose behind playing these moves is as highlighted on the board. We're simply controlling central space and creating space for our bishops to develop. Now knight to f3. It attacks the e5 pawn and gains central space. Black defends with his knight and also gains central space. Now we play bishop to c4. This places the bishop on the square where it controls the most amount of space. It also targets the weakest point in black's pawn structure, the f7 pawn. Now why is this the weakest point? Well, it is the weakest point because the only piece defending it is the black king, and if the king is drawn out into the middle of the board, then it can be more easily checkmated. If you lose the king, you lose the game. So often in chess, an attack is built up against f7 because it is a pretty weak point and would directly attack the king. Alright, in addition to that, the bishop is also moving out of the way so that white's king can castle on the next move. And here we see bishop to c5 from black, which also does the exact same things that white's bishop is doing. It controls the most amount of space and also targets the weakest point, this pawn on f2. Now white castles. Great move, king safety, and brings another defender for the f2 pawn so that way it is not as weak. Alright, knight to f6. Good move, gaining more central space and allowing black to be able to castle on the next move should he choose to do so, and also attacking this pawn on e4. So therefore white must defend the pawn, and he does so with d3, which is a great way to defend the pawn because it also opens up some space to develop his dark-squared bishop. So that is good. Now we see that black plays his pawn to d6, and as you can see here there are a lot of arrows on the screen, and I'm going to explain what all of this means. Alright, so the idea here is that if white just plays some random moves, that are not the best moves in this position, then black can quickly set up an attack by pinning this knight to the queen and then attacking the knight a second time. And as you can see here, white only has a pawn and a queen to defend the knight. So that way, whenever black does capture it, it will ruin white's pawn structure on the king side and greatly expose his king. Now there's all of this air, all of this extra space between the king and the other side of the board. The pawn is no longer standing directly in front of the king. Therefore, black can more easily attack white's king and will have the advantage. If he can capture the king, then he will win the game. So therefore, opening up the king side is not what white wants to happen. To prevent that, he simply plays h3. Now here's a lot of more arrows, but the idea behind h3 is to stop black from ever playing his bishop to this g4 square that is currently being highlighted. So it just stops the knight from being pinned and therefore stops the attack. Now, as we can see here, because the positions are quite identical and very similar, white could also do the same thing to black. He just needs to get his knight developed, and then he could pin black's knight to the queen and use his knight to attack this knight on f6 twice. So the same attack could happen. Therefore, black defends against it by playing h6, preventing the knight from ever being pinned. So that is a good move. Now we see knight out to c3, just gaining more central space and development. That is quite a common idea or theme in the opening, is to gain central space and develop your pieces. Alright, now black castles. Great job, king safety, and ensuring that the f7 point, which was the weakest point, is now being protected a second time. So that is a great idea. Now white plays his rook to e1. The idea here is to support moving the bishop out to e3, so that the bishop is also supported by the rook, and therefore it can more easily challenge black's bishop on c5. So it's just gaining more support for the bishop. Alright, so black plays the same move, and then we see the bishops being exchanged. Now, you don't really have to trade the bishops off here. There's other possible variations. Black could move the bishop back. There's other ideas. You really don't have to follow this exact pattern. But bishop takes on e3 is certainly a good move. But there are other good moves in this position, as you will find out. So you can play around with it and pick and choose which moves you think are best. Now black here, a good move would be to play his bishop out simply to this square. But I decided to show what would happen if bishop to e6 was played and we got a completely symmetrical position. But that doesn't have to happen. I mean, the bishop moving out here is also good, and so there's other ways that you can play with this. There's other moves that you can make that are also good to play. Alright, but we see bishop e6, the bishops trade off, the rook takes, and now we have reached a dead equal position where both sides control the same amount of space, they have great development and king safety. The next moves that each player will focus on is simply to activate his queen and remaining rook. Remember that you want to get all of your pieces into the game and control as much space as possible. And the more pieces you have in the game, the easier it is to attack and defend. So therefore it makes sense to continue development, get the queen into the game, get the rook into the game, and that is very important. So for my next video, I will go over a couple of games that follow this opening system so that you can get some more ideas for your own games. We will be able to look at the tactical side a little bit more and also look a little bit at the strategic side and what choices that the players made during the opening that may be slightly different than I showed you here and how that turned out for them, and the ideas behind those moves. So that will be my next set of videos. Is just going to cover a few games to help give you some more ideas.